Great, great. Let's jump right into it. What is NIDIS, the National Integrated Drought Information System? Uh, our program within the Climate Program Office of OAR, which is part of NOAA, was first authorized by Congress back in 2006. And we've been reauthorized a couple times since then with the mission to really improve our response to the impact of drought in the United States. And that does include drought in Alaska, the Pacific Islands, Puerto Rico, and Hawaii. So a national effort with regard to focusing on drought. And how does NIDIS do that? The principal idea is to have a federal level program that has regional capability to work with partners at all levels. At the tribal level, with the states, utilities, as you'll see in our strategic action plan going forward, we want to expand that to include nonprofits and all of the business sectors that are impacted by drought. But we'll get into that and see a little bit more detail on that as we kind of talk through both the history of the Northeast Dews and NIDIS and what we do, and then hit on those touch points between the Northeast CASC mission statement and how I think NIDIS and the CASC can work most effectively together. So just to start by giving you a little bit of an overview of the mission, and we're going to talk a lot about the activities of NIDIS across the country and regionally. So specifically, again, we are working toward that drought early warning capability. And that obviously is going to include improvements to forecasting and prediction of precipitation, as well as temperatures, because we know in the Northeast in particular, our droughts are driven by those two elements, and they're very cyclic, or we go in and out of drought periods. We'll talk a little bit about flash drought or rapid onset and intensification of drought, where the intensification process is kind of highlighted by the element of more extreme warm periods. So again, precipitation and forecasting is a focus, particularly for our research projects, integrating those research projects with folks who work in the environmental fields. That's a key piece of what we want to do going forward at the national level. But also, and particularly at the regional levels, we want to work on drought planning and preparedness. So those entities within the states here in the Northeast, and you'll see in a moment a map, the Dews in the Northeast is comprised of 7 states. So New York and the New England states, and we work quite intensively with the folks who are on the drought task forces from those states or the drought monitoring committees in those states, and work with them on their needs for monitoring drought and, again, just preparedness ideas. So those are some of the mission and activities that you'll find throughout NIDIS, as well as throughout regional DEWS activities. But also, there's some specific things that kind of, I use this slide to kind of highlight some of the differences across the national level with regard to DEWS. So again, not to say that we don't have wildfire issues here in the Northeast, but a lot of our drought research focus is in relationship to what's going on within the research community that works on wildfires out west. We do a lot of work on drought indicators and triggers, and that's going to be nationally. So just to give you an overview of some of the areas that we are working in, one of the key elements of my position within NIDIS is that I work with the National Integrated Heat Health Information System. That's NIHIS. And NIHIS, of course, focuses on extreme heat events. And there's clearly a tie between drought and heat. So that, again, relates to public health and human health issues, and is a big part of what we do, again, with NIDIS, is reaching out to other communities to make sure that we're out of our silo and we're working on things that give us an indicator or things that allow us to focus our efforts more tightly on drought research. The DEWs, the Drought Early Warning Systems itself, like the national system, we kind of look at it as having a focus of these elements. Interdisciplinary research, we've talked about, observation and monitoring, prediction and forecasting, planning and preparedness. And one of the elements that I really want to dive into later on in the Q&A session, as I learn more about the Northeast Cask myself, is communication and outreach, and how we're not just working with the folks who are managing drought and dealing with drought, but also communicating to the public or to some of those sectors that we don't work in yet to the level that we want to work in. How are we communicating with the media? How are we working on our communication packages to the public about drought? So again, just a circle of focused efforts that are going to hopefully lead us to that drought early warning capability. And you can also see on this slide the maps that demonstrate where our DEWs regions are located and where they're not located. So as you can see, there are some areas that don't quite have full coverage. We've recently expanded the Midwest DEWs area to include the areas all the way up around the Great Lakes, And we're working on making sure that everyone within the nation understands that even if you don't have a formal DEWs with a strategic action plan and a DEWs coordinator or a drought information coordinator, that you know that even if you live in Louisiana or Arkansas and are experiencing drought issues that need to be addressed, you can pull on that national reservoir of information. And we'll kind of talk about that as we talk and about some elements of our Droughtgov or drought information portal. So I did want to focus on this and even crow just a little bit. We were very excited about the possibility that our website, Drought.gov, might be nominated for a Webby Award. And some of you may know what that is. The Webbies are a lot like Emmys. And to be, as they say at all the award show, to be nominated would be the greatest honor of all. Unfortunately, we did not get that nomination this year, 2022, but we're going to continue to work on that and improve the Drought.gov portal. You may have known it back in 2018, 2019, but we went through a fairly intensive redesign phase in 2020. And in January of 2021, premiered a brand new Drought.gov that has, I think, been a real big asset to us in terms of communicating the mission of NIDIS, as well as providing at the DEWs level specific information for those who come to us for drought information. So again, 2021, we saw that improvement and upgrade to US web standards, sector pages specific to agriculture, public health, water utilities, and we want to continue to improve the drought portal, which I do hope you all will come to know well and use. Another focus that I want to make sure that you're aware of, because it does inform how our strategic action plan goes forward, is to know how the DEWs here in the Northeast got started. So right around the 2016, 2017 timeframe, many of the New England states, New York, were experiencing what would be about the second significant period of drought in a region that is typically known for water abundance, which got everybody's attention. And you can see this particular Drought.gov historical timeline on this slide that I used to kind of highlight the fact that, again, 2016, 2017, folks started to think back to some periods around the early decade of the 2000s, and again, thinking back to the early 2000s, looking at the more significant droughts here, that we might be in a situation where, because of climate change, we're going to see um, more repeat cycles of drought in the Northeast. And what happened in 2016 and 2017 was that the states in our region got together and said, well, this is what we need. This is the kind of data we need to monitor the impacts. This is the kind of research that we need, because we don't have enough information on, say, maybe a groundwater issue in a particular area, or precipitation forecasts need to be improved in a certain way. So that early focus in 2016, 2017 kicked off the Northeast DEWs in a more formal way, similar to what was going on out west with the Western DEWs. And more of that kickoff generated some very specific targets for the first year. They were identified in a plan, a strategic action plan. It was a smaller plan, a 2-year plan covering 2018 and 2019. And some core elements came out of that plan, some activities that needed to happen to kind of improve the response, at least initially. And those three of those items are highlighted here on this slide in particular. The formation of a very tight relationship between the Northeast Region Climate Center, which is housed at Cornell, and the activities with the DEWs specific to drought. There's been a wonderful, long-standing relationship with the NRCC and NOAA's Climate Program Office. But again, just to kind of focus a little bit more tightly on drought, a couple of items came out of that first strategic action plan. And it was the use of a dashboard to highlight drought information, organizing a drought monitoring group, and that would be headed by an individual who could coordinate response information, impact information, situational information from the region, and then feed that in a very coordinated way to the U.S. Drought Monitor authors. So our Google group, essentially an email group, was formulated and put into effect to kind of facilitate that whole idea of feeding that information to the U.S. Drought Monitor, and also beginning to identify some of those research elements that we needed to focus on. What makes drought unique in the Northeast as opposed to out west? Should we be focusing on the differences in snow melt and snow survey information? Is key to letting us know a little bit about what are the spring conditions going to be? Are we going to dive straight into drought this year? Is the groundwater recharging? So again, out of that initial strategic action plan, some elements came about that helped us focus to kind of get our foundation laid for the Northeast DEWs region. And of course, I hesitate a little bit to talk about myself and my position, but the idea of installing a Northeast Region Drought Information Coordinator was a part of that original plan. So in 2020, June, when I finally came along and came to the position, we wanted to focus on how we were going to expand our capabilities in the Northeast DEWs, how to update that 2-year plan. And we started out with some listening sessions among many of the close partners, many of the states, many of the folks who work with us from the academic sector, extension programs at the various universities. And also, I started to get a feel that, yeah, some of the things that were identified in that first 2-year plan were really good ideas that we want to foster and keep going and eventually add to. And so in October 2021, we turned those listening sessions a little bit around and decided we're going to talk more about the lessons that we've learned over the last 5 years, 10 years with regard to monitoring drought, mitigating drought. And we're going to provide a platform for folks to share those ideas and what the outcomes were that needed to be updated in the plan. So today is pretty much, I guess you could say, the coming out for our next strategic action plan for the Northeast Dews. And we hope to focus that across 4 years, giving us plenty of time to have some extended research projects, time to really dive deep and figure out how we want to expand our monitoring networks. But I think the key idea with most NIDIS type strategic action plans is to know that they're living documents. Every single year, we're going to be looking at them in detail. We're going to be updating them, evaluating what's working and what's not working, listening sessions, lessons learned, shared. That's the key methodology for our strategic action plan. And I apologize right off the bat for this being a fairly text heavy slide, but I'll ask you to focus your attention maybe just on the boldly highlighted elements within each bullet there, to give you an idea of, again, what the priorities are that we have, evolved and seen evolve over the last few years for not just the plan itself, but how we want to move forward. And it does reflect quite straightforwardly those DEWS components, the idea of research, understanding indicators and indices, drought planning, preparedness, working with our stakeholders, collaboration and communication, and then more key, looking deeply into each of those areas to quite honestly see where we're lacking. And so the activities that are part of the action in a strategic action plan, I just wanted to take a little bit of time to highlight a couple of them here. And as we go into finding where those touch points are between our two agencies, between our missions. So we'll talk a little bit about that Northeast Dews dashboard. And that did come out of those first meetings back in 2018, 2019, or excuse me, 2017, and the plan of 2018, 2019. And that dashboard became one of the first places where we could actually put the data, put the information, put the models, links to the research, links to current conditions that all relate to drought that can be used by all of our partners. And I do encourage you, if you got a copy of this presentation beforehand, there are some active links there. You can follow right along with me and pop into the Northeast Dews dashboard, again, run by the NRCC at Cornell, and take a look at some of the products there. And my email is, right in the chat box there, as well as at the end of the presentation. We'll always want to get your input and feedback on maybe what should be added to that Northeast Dews dashboard. Another highlight element will be, of course, that we want to make sure that we are communicating internally within the Dews itself. We want to make sure that discussion groups are facilitated, not just with regard to getting information back to the U.S. Drought Monitor authors, but a platform that does provide an exchange of information capability. What's happening in New York? What's happening just across the border in Vermont? And improving that, I think, is one of the highlights that a Dews, one of the highlight activities that a Dews can provide in a local area, and is actually quite common in many of the Dews throughout the country. And I think it does provide, it begins to touch on that capability as we start to see the indicators, as we start to see the drought impacts occur. It does give us something of that early warning that we really might be diving into a more significant drought or not. And I do, again, encourage you to kind of visit or join that one of those discussion groups, that particular Google group, if you're interested. And then I also want to highlight the fact that there's a Northeast Dews drought dashboard certainly doesn't mean it's the end all and be all. We want to focus on decision support at all levels. So over the past couple of years, we have been working with, say, the state of Massachusetts to develop and expand their drought decision dashboard. what is the data that the people in Massachusetts really need to have in order to help them monitor their regions and provide information to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, private sector, public. What do they need to make those decisions? And again, one of the highlights is that they have a very active drought monitoring committee. They have this Massachusetts dashboard, and that idea of dashboards and one-stop shops for data has definitely taken off, not just in the Northeast, but again, it's spurred the idea that, well, let's look at what maybe the state of Connecticut really wants to do. And they came to us and said, we want to focus more on a dashboard that gives us real-time monitoring capability of our reservoirs. So that's a project that is currently going on with regard to the state of Connecticut. And again, it's a key element of exactly what a DEWS can do. So let's address that topic. What does a DEWS coordinator do? What does a DEWS do? And I always like to tell folks that when you've seen one DEWS, you've seen one DEWS. So that to say or highlight that obviously for geographic reasons, climate reasons, soils are different in various regions. Each DEWS does have some unique characteristics that respond to drought differently. And so each DEWS will be a little bit different. But then there, again, as we've talked about, some elements that cross those DEWS. And we'll talk about a little more in a moment about cross DEWS activities. But I did want to kind of just express my own personal philosophy, which is in the red box on this slide. I think my job is to show up, shut up, and that translates to be an active listener, and then understand the needs of the partners in our region. And that, of course, leads to customizing drought information and drought research to again, move us toward that drought early warning capability. So I hope no one was offended by the use of the shut up phrase, but I think it's an important mentality to have when you are defining where you want to go, how your strategic action plan is going to look, evolve, and really function for the folks who are your partners and stakeholders. So, and this particular highlight, looks at some of the research that's already been done or is ongoing or is coming up in the Northeast DEWS, in other DEWS, just to focus us more toward those touch points. So my instincts tell me that research is really the key touch point between the Northeast CASC and NIDIS, and our strategic action plan is looking at research that's going on in the Southeast DEWS with regard to coastal salinity gauges. What can those gauges tell us about drought happening on the coastlines? And that's something that's going to be expanded and explored in the next few years. We're going to continue to look at research projects that could be funded or have been funded, and the data that's coming out of those projects already. So there's some great work going on at the University of Massachusetts Lowell with regard to, again, one of the more unique features of the Northeast, the yin and the yang of drought and water abundance, heat waves, how they relate to drought, precipitation regimes, heat patterns driven by climate. So some great research going on there that actually is going to be wrapping up next year. And then collaborations, again, across NIDIS, across that DEWS enterprise, collaborations with the Drought Research Institute out west and the University of Colorado with some research projects that have taken place out there. So again, I'm looking at making sure that the Northeast DEWS and using that NIDIS focus on research is going to be one of the keys that helps to bind the Northeast CASC and my organization. So let's just kind of delve into that strategic action plan and what I saw in your mission statement with regard to an emphasis on actionable science for decision makers. And so these are some of the projects on this slide that we hope to tackle over the next 4 years, and to maybe find common work groups, common interests, not just in the outcomes of the research projects and maybe the data sets that are being refined to be used in those projects, but also some idea of when those projects are done, where are we going? What are the next steps? What's going to take us out of just a drought silo or drought focus and put us very squarely into an area where we can work easily and more readily across government, across federal government, across state government, and go forward. So you can see here some of the focus areas are on strengthening streamflow forecasts. We want to work a little bit more closely with the folks out west, and by west I'm thinking Midwest. The Midwest Region Climate Center has done some great work on the Keach-Bynum Drought Index, making it a weekly product. There's some ideas that we want to incorporate with regard to making it more reflective of precipitation patterns in the 1 to 2 week time frame. So some improvements on KBDI that we're looking at working on with various regions. We want to, and this is something I'd like to ask or have come out in our question and answer session in a few minutes, talking about how we want to promote citizen science and maybe how that's being viewed in the CASC, and how NIDIS wants to go forward with that, and then what we want to do maybe together. So obviously also with that whole of government approach, we want to make sure that we are engaging the tribes in the Northeast to make sure that they have the information that they need to improve the situation within data gathering on tribal lands. T-scan or tribal soil moisture information is really important. I just left another presentation a few hours ago where we talked a little bit about T-scan data and how that needs to maybe be incorporated into what NIDIS is working on, called our National Soil Moisture Coordinated Network. Again, the idea of a national network that has regional components. It's a network of networks, and making sure that that is well supported, state level, university level, tribal level. So I think there's some touch points there. And I also will be updating you on specifically the eco-drought research competition that was announced last year, and what's going on with that, which is going to produce, I think, a lot of good information that both our agencies would be interested in. Okay. Again, another slightly dense text slide here, but it does give you, again, just a few ideas of what in the range of hydrological extremes and water resource management, some of the things that we want to focus on there. Best practices in water conservation, not just among the public, but also with regard to forestry and forest management. More in the realm of meteorology, looking at probability-based rainfall and stream flow forecasts. So again, quite a few areas I think we can touch on, and maybe you can share what you think from this slide needs to be a higher priority, prioritizing some of our efforts, since, you know, we only have a limited amount of money. And also we talked a little bit about before about flash drought. You know, the concept of flash drought out west is a little bit questionable, if you want to put it that way, because drought seems to simply be persistent out west. But in the Northeast, comes and goes, tends to have a flashy character to it, or to give it a better moniker. I think some people don't like the term flash drought, but really hone in on rapid intensification of drought conditions or rapid onset of drought conditions. So I think that again is an area where when we look at the research and what it's telling us from the Forest Service, other element arms of the USGS, what other research institutions, we can really begin to define flash drought or rapid onset and intensification of drought in the Northeast. So finally, again, I did mention a little bit earlier that I think one of the important areas that we could be working on over the next 4 years, not just through the Northeast DEW Strategic Action Plan, but through activities that I know that are already going on within the CASCs, but that National Soil Moisture Monitoring Network, that network of networks. And what NIDIS wants to bring to the party here are these elements, the idea of some consistent methodologies for the data that's going to come from those networks, collaborating on funding opportunities. So again, just another way I think that in the next 4 years, we'll be able to work very closely together and get some great outputs. In terms of just highlighting a few additional cross-DEWs activities and partnerships, as I mentioned before, I really, really don't like silos. Yes, I'm in the drought world, very specifically so, a very specific element of climate and weather in its own right, a very unique set of atmospheric conditions. We want to just make sure we're keeping the silo door open. And we do that through, again, partnerships. I've been working recently with the EPA on their CREATE tool. It's a tool that is focused on helping water utilities look at planning better, long-term and short-term for drought, and even for the yin and yang, the water abundance side, followed by the drought, and then repeating that cycle. That's been a very exciting opportunity to work with the EPA on that. And I think that is occurring in some other DEWs across the country. Specifically here in New York, we're looking forward to funding a project with SUNY, State University of New York, with regard to digging into a database of dry well information. And that information is primarily shows up in permits to dig new wells to replace, wells that have dried up, and trying to see if we can tease out some interesting information from what's going on with the very activity of having to dig new wells. We really think there's something there research-wise, and we're looking forward to working with SUNY on that project. So again, you can just see, again, there seems to be a need to focus on small and medium-sized water utilities. The big water utilities have a lot of resources at their disposal, management-wise, modeling-wise, but maybe the small and medium-sized utilities could use some of the products that could come out of our work. And then finally, a quick update for now on the Coping with Drought projects from FY22, the grant program. We have, and these links again are very active if you want to go in and take a look at the details. NIDIS has is corralling the efforts to take a look at research in 2 specific areas. One, which is itemized on CPO's website as competition 7, is eco-drought. So again, just trying to look a little more specifically into the impacts of drought on whole ecosystems. And then item number 8 is focused on building tribal drought resilience. So I think these are 2 competitions that over the next couple of years will allow to rise to the top some really great research efforts and information. Those project authorizations or winners will be announced in June or July, which I think is a little bit later than normal for RFPs to be announced, but that's just where we are in the cycle this year with various delays that are going on out there. But do keep an eye on what those projects are going to be looking like in both the tribal area and the eco-drought area. And now we get to the part that I'm really, really looking forward to, which is an opportunity for you to ask me questions, not just about the strategic action plan for the Northeast Dues, but about NIDIS. Really trying to, again, drill down on what do we need to do to get to that early warning capability. And this slide is just a prompt. I'll be taking notes offline, but also, is there anything else that NIDIS can do and our regional networks or the Northeast Dues can do to support regional cooperation and coordination? So in particular, those that will fit in with the Northeast CAS mission. So that's what I have for now. And I want to just have Will go ahead and take the wheel there and driving the meeting, and we'll set up for what I can't see right now. We do have a few questions in the chat, so I'll open that chat and we can get going.